Happy New Year, motherfucker. But again, like I said, I'm just kidding because we philosophers, we don't believe in time. Hey, I can't hear you right now.
I'm not saying anything.
Oh, okay, that's why.
I was just making a face.
Hey, but that would presuppose that in order to hear you, time would have had to pass. And that's not true because I don't believe in time. It's all one deterministic thing. Anyway, I think that's a great topic to start off on just by virtue of us being New Year's Eve. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Time.
But at the risk of sounding pompous and arrogant, I'm going to ask you, Oliver, as a philosopher, why is it that you don't believe in time? And why is it that you think that philosophers don't believe in time?
I do believe in time. I think it's a concept.
Yay, you got it. It's a paradox. You have no choice to believe in time, but yet at the same time, you have no choice to believe that it doesn't exist in some capacity. I mean, if you're going to be a philosopher, you're going to have to work around that axiom of time, past and future. You know
Right.
what I mean? So
It's kind of like mathematics. It's another transcendental argument for something beyond pure empiricism.
mm-hmm. Can you expand on that? Because that's something that most people I don't think would understand. It sounds very clear and resumed to people like us, but for someone who's just like,
yeah. Well, we talked about this in another episode, but I guess I'll try to go through it again. Basically, I mean, if you take what people argue to be the only way of knowing things for real, like in science and just in general these days, that's called empiricism, which means what you can know through your senses. But I mean, if you only take what you can know through your senses right here, right now, you can't predict that there is even time. You can sort of experience the passage of time, but it's a very abstract concept. It's a very abstract sense. It's not quantifiable
through your empirical senses.
Right here, right now, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, I mean, if all you can really know is right here, right now, and through your fingers, your eyeballs, and your nose holes, then how do you know that tomorrow morning the sun's going to come up, right? There are some things that we have to chalk up to more than just pure empiricism. We have to realize that there's other ways of knowing things, and mathematics is one. You can't prove mathematics empirically. I mean, there's examples of mathematics that are empirical, but it's transcendent of that. And there's what's called transcendental arguments, and we've touched on that. Maybe we'll get into that later, or even make a whole episode on this. But I like to say some of the big tools for transcendence are transcendental arguments, time, mathematics, logic, these kinds of things that are beyond just the pure physical empirical.
So having said that, would you kind of agree with the following statement that in a sense, transcendental tools, like you said, time, mathematics, and logic, do you think that those are alternative ways to meditate? Because I feel very meditative when I can't. Yeah,
definitely. Also, scale. One thing that has gotten me into a trance, if anyone wants to try this, is try to conceive of the largest possible thing you can and then the smallest possible thing you can, and do that over and over again. You're going to end up having a fucking seizure. It's crazy.
But like it's a good seizure though, right?
Yes, a very pleasurable, enlightening seizure.
Pleasurable. Sounds like that Jim Carrey scene in that movie. I don't know what it was there, but I think it's the one, Bruce Almighty. Yeah. He's
all
like,
right. I loved that movie as a kid, man.
That was hilarious. He's about to like bang his girlfriend for the first time as God. And so like she's getting ready in the bathroom. And he's just like giving her pleasure. And she gets all like, ooh. And it's funny and kind of digression in a weird way, but kind of relevant because God is, in a sense, another word that we can use to encapsulate all of those concepts, right? Logic, time, mathematics, transcendence,
right?
Connection, so to speak.
I like to think that the original use of the word God by intelligent people was just in referring to these things that are kind of beyond very empirical, logical, animalistic realities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. See, I I want to. So there's a couple of ways we can split off here. One, I want to state that as a philosopher, what I like to do when I think about things, I like to go from the perspective of time not existing, because I'm biased in that sense. I feel like if if time doesn't exist, it allows me, and if I try to think in terms of that, sort of those parameters, which is a sort of frozen existence that doesn't have any fluidity to it, I feel like it allows me to pinpoint very, very specific concepts and clarify them so that I can unfreeze the universe in a sense, and
Okay.
see how that pinpointed concept, I guess, is connected to all the other concepts in fluidity of time. Does that make any sense? So
Yeah, I think that there's other ways to do it, but it's like, what are the constants, right?
yeah.
What are the things that just reality keeps coming back to? And I think time is one of them. I think mathematics is another one. There's a
Yeah.
pattern that reality just keeps coming back to that can be expressed through numbers.
Hmm.
Um,
And see, this is why I think,
Logic as well.
philosophy, especially philosophers of today, they tend to major in other fields like neuroscience and mathematically based sort of fields, and they make very good philosophers because they do understand certain concepts that are a lot more applicable to the practicality of day-to-day lives, right? I mean, if you study quantum physics, then you can philosophize on based on computing, for example, which is what we're doing now. We're trying to find a new way to compute information instead of using standard transistor based, silicon based type computing. We want to go to a quantum physics based, right? So instead of binary, we go to quantum. So these things, they have a
Oh,
lot of practical applications, and so you can get some interesting questions that come out from those people when it comes to morality and all these other things. It can sort of extrapolate to some degree these other more abstract concepts because they have hard data. So I think people who philosophize in the pure philosophy sense, that's our weakness, is that we're sort of at the mercy of the information that we can sort of like deduce for ourselves as being true or not true when we get it from those people. So like if I read about quantum physics, or if I read about classical physics, or if I read about mathematics, like for example, if I go and I look up Cantor, for example, who proved that there are many kinds of infinities, right? That infinity is
right.
in some measure something that's calculable. Now, I'm at the mercy of that person's ideas. Maybe there's another guy who comes along and disproves some fundamental aspects that Cantor sort of like unveiled to the world, and then my philosophy is sort of predicated on something that is bogus, right? So, or at least the idea that I used from Cantor. So I think this is why philosophy and like natural philosophy, these two things are interlinked. And I think time, ultimately speaking, is the medium through which pure philosophers have no choice but to philosophize. Because if you're going to start philosophizing based on mathematics, then you got to go either to the information that is available to you, and at some point you're going to find that you need to go deeper and deeper, and you just need to study it yourself and become a scientist as well,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah. Well, it's like logic is not math and math is not logic, though they have a lot of similarities. You can't come to the same conclusions or the same, how do I say, discoveries of value through mathematics as with logic, but they're both incredibly useful tools, different directions. They're both different paths to reaching the truth and
hmm
different aspects of truth, too. It's different faces of reality.
but
Uh,
so you bring up a great segue, right? Because you're talking about truth in this regard. So I want to go into that direction. What is it about time that from one perspective or another, allows for some kind of ability to harness truth? What is it about time that we can figure out certain truths? Because we know with mathematics, there's like a practicality in front of you. There's something physically there. It's very empirical. But then with time, it's so abstract. What is it about the abstract, for some reason, that despite its abstractness, we can still extrapolate very real truths or some kind of objectivity?
I'd say that there's something very practical too about time. Like the Greeks had the KRONOS and KAIROS. It's two different types of time. KRONOS was very like minute by minute. It was calculated as it was based on the cycles of the sun, the planets around the sun, and that was very set. And then there's KAIROS too, which is more the impression that you get from
Ooh,
time. It's right.
I
It's
like that.
like
I like
yeah,
that.
it's
That's a
more the
lot more.
experiential.
Yeah. See, so there was a sort of dynamic that they understood about time. They said one of it is practical, one of it is more of a sense. Um,
Yeah,
okay. Wow.
yeah.
I didn't know that. So are there specific Greek philosophers who came up with these, or this is just sort of something that?
I can't remember. I read about this ages ago, and
Okay,
I checked it a few times, and I know those are the definitions, but I don't know about like
that's
when that
fine.
came up and under what philosophers. But yeah, it's a very interesting concept, and I've always liked that. I
Yeah.
mean, Kairos and Chronos mean different things than just referring to time, but that's their main. That's their root. I mean, when you think of a chronometer, it's time. It's a timer, second by second. But
So can you
uh,
explain? Because like I think I know what chronos
yeah,
means in the sense that I think in a way chronos would have to do with measurement, right? It's 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 measurements. It's mathematics.
exactly.
So what is
It's
Kairos?
metrics.
So what's the other one? Kairos, you said?
Kairos, yeah.
So what is that?
Well, you know how Einstein, there's a famous quote of his. It's like, you touch a hot pan and it feels like an hour, and
Hmm.
you spend 5 minutes with a pretty girl and it feels like 4 hours. That's Kairos. That's
No,
it's like,
I think the
mhm.
opposite. I think if you spend 4 hours with a girl, it only seems like a split second.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
my bad. Yeah, yeah. With a girl, it feels like 4 minutes. Yeah, my bad.
yeah.
You're right. Um, but I think time actually brings things into perspective in a completely different way. I mean,
So
like you're
so
talking about,
Kairos.
it kind
Sorry,
of demonstrates the yeah, sure.
can I cut you off? I just want to peg this down. So Kairos is that very sense that it describes that which you've just explained is
Yeah.
that sensation.
It's hard
It's
to
the
actually
relativity of
define
time.
Kairos. Yeah,
Let's say it's the relativity of time as you experience it. That would be Kairos, right?
yeah,
Okay, okay.
right.
That's a good
And
definition. Then let's go with that one.
they do talk about phenomenons where time dilates or constricts, and that gets into physics. And I mean, like if you talk about going to a black hole or into a singularity, time passes differently. Those kinds of things. But they talked about actual like experiences and times and places where this could happen. Apparently, I don't know, but they seem to have a good grasp on some of these concepts that are pretty advanced. Despite that, what I was going to say is, I mean, time demonstrates a lot of things. Like we touched on consistency and the constants. You can't really identify constants and the large themes throughout reality without time. I mean, you could, but it's a great demonstrator of it, right? So,
I
like
don't
the
know.
fact that the cycles of the sun keep coming back, that's a major theme of reality. Cycles,
Yeah, but that's
right?
consistency. I wouldn't call that a constant because at any one time, this solar system could smash into another one, and then no more consistency of that pattern.
Yeah,
But
but
a
there are
constant to me,
various levels.
yeah,
There are levels of constancy.
yeah, I guess. But when it comes to time, I would see time as the ultimate constant, right? Or existence, which seem to be something that go hand in hand, right? Like you don't get the
Right.
space-time construct without reality
Well,
itself.
I think you could say it's one of the faces of God.
Yeah, yeah. So okay, so yeah, an ultimate constant is different. You could look at, yeah, because I guess I just want to define the two and the difference between the two: consistency and then a constant. Because a constant seems to be something that's infinite in some measure, whereas consistency is something that um, it's something that is consistent. Seems to be something like a regularity. It's like a pattern, but it doesn't necessarily include the notion of the infinite, right?
Well, okay, the way I could say this is something that is consistent will usually be a reflection, like a crude reflection of a constant,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
right?
Yeah, that makes more sense.
Yeah, so I think the things that are more constant in nature and what observable physical reality reflect typically mathematical or logical concepts, right? And when you start talking about these more some people would say abstract or philosophical topics, that's when you start getting into the real themes or the constants,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think,
These are the more pure aspects of reality.
yeah. So it's interesting because, you know, obviously when we philosophize, we don't, like I'm studying the German philosophers primarily, a little bit of, absurdism, so Camus, and I kind of want to get into the postmodernist literature to understand it and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's interesting to point out how, if you philosophize, if that's what you want, if that's what you do, that at some point it's necessary to try to understand how you come to philosophize. So that's why the epistemological kind of conversation that we had really kind of helped understand me, or at least understand myself better and how I do operate. Because it's one thing to think about something, but it's another thing to understand how you think about something. So, the mechanisms of critical thought. And so I gotta appreciate this moment. You've taught me something that actually seems pretty elementary. Someone who actually goes and studies philosophy as an academic would probably already have known about, how time works in terms of at least what the Greeks
Some do,
had.
some
Like,
don't. I've talked to some philosophy students that
yeah,
think that numbers are just chemicals in our brain.
yeah, exactly. So, but I don't like to reduce it down to, who knows what by doing what, right? But what I'm saying is, obviously I'm anti-academic when it comes to philosophy. Everything else I don't have an opinion on, but I'm an anti-academic because I think by virtue of you studying philosophy, you're no longer philosophizing. So like Socrates was a philosopher of the streets, right? He I think he taught, and he thought, but he didn't study and learn. So I think
He taught, he thought.
he taught and he thought, and he didn't study and learn, which is to basically unlearn critical thinking, which is the primary point. So like, this is why I feel like most philosophers are usually the most influential ones are never people who set out to study philosophy. Like Nietzsche, he was a philologist. Socrates was, I don't know what he was really. I think he was a bum. Basically, I heard from what I heard. And
Socrates was, yeah.
yeah, but look at other people of today. The most influential philosophers. You got Sam Harris. The guy's a neuroscientist. He had a minor in philosophy, but mostly he's you got Christopher Hitchens, who's in literature. He was a great philosopher. He did a lot for philosophy, and in terms of bringing dogma to light. And so I think that's sort of,
I think he's overrated.
yeah, I feel as if though that I feel as if though it's necessary to think about how you think. You want to observe yourself, and because it's almost like checking the oil in the engine, and just doing maintenance on your car, making sure that you understand the basic tools with which you use, or the ones that you use in order to philosophize, right? So I gotta say thank you for clarifying that. And I think
Man.
KRONOS and what was the other one?
KAIROS.
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 Okay, so I'm gonna look those up, and we should probably put a link in the description for some interesting information that we find about that. How I want to direct the conversation more into time, in the sense, in a little bit more of a practical way. I think we're just being pretty abstract about it as so far, but I want to ask the ultimate questions, at least I want to know what your
At me, bro.
perspectives. Yeah, exactly. What's your perspectives? Um, when it comes to time, the ultimate question has to be, does it actually pass, or does everything happen in one instant? That's the ultimate one, right? Because Einstein's relativity basically, begs that question. It says, well, if all time passes only based on relativity, then if you ask certain scenario questions like, okay, well, let's say there is nothing there is nothing in existence that can relate to each other, let's say, or that would be a scenario where, it's a space construct that has no matter. But even if you look at the universe as it is right now, if matter keeps spreading, which is what's happening, right, where everything is pushing apart, then that relativity, doesn't it sort of disintegrate? I mean, if there's more space between two, let's say, pieces of mass, then the relativity seems to be a lot more difficult to understand. And because do you know what I mean? So they're not relevant to each other if they're so far away. That how does that work? You know what I mean? Like, does time just pass in one instant? Like, if I were a god, or a consciousness that was looking on the bubble of the universe that we inhabit, would everything that happens in the history and will happen in the future, would it all happen in one instant, like a pop? Is that the way it works? Is that what relativity is sort of pointing to?
Yeah. Yeah. I would say so.
That's simple. You would say so? Why? I mean,
Well, okay,
why?
if you're a god, and well, it's a matter of perspective. It's contrast. It's how long have you existed, and how long is the period of time that you're observing compared to that. It's like people, when they get older, they say time passes faster. Man, in the last 2 years, I've seen that. Time is just accelerated. It feels like time's passing
Yeah.
no time at all. I can't imagine living billions of years and then looking at one person's life and being like, fuck off, stop fucking complaining about it, being like, have some fucking patience.
I think it's relevant to size, just sheer size, because like,
Sure. I mean, it's the same thing.
Yeah, that's another thing too. You got to think about all these different angles. So like, if you're big enough to, let's say, hold the entire universe on the tip of your thumb, then you have to have some kind of relativity to the space construct that you're in, that allows for a greater encompassment of the space-time construct that sits on the tip of your thumb. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you're so big that you exist outside of the space-time construct of the universe, then you must inhabit another space-time construct that allows you to experience the entirety of that universe.
Yeah.
So the relativity seems to be something that's relevant to to size.
Mm-hmm.
Size of consciousness, I guess.
Well, I think scale is almost a metaphysical concept, and it kind of reverts back on itself. So, because metaphysics is the study of, this is a way to put it, it's not an official definition, but it's a study of the constants, right? But I like to think that well, it comes back to, there's a similarity to quantum physics too. You know, quantum physics, it's study of what's very small, but it's also the study of what's very, very big, right? And it's basically what's outside of the bubble,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. We have access
our context.
Yeah, we have access to the quantum world, or in a different way, I think it would make things more clear. We have access to the levels below us, more than we do the levels above us. At least access of information, because I mean, I obviously,
Perhaps.
right? Like,
It's
because
not
like
easy to.
the Hubble
Yeah.
telescope can look at the observable universe to some degree. Like, we can see billions and billions of galaxies outside of our own galaxy, right? But aside from that, what information can you extrapolate You could be like, cool, there's other things, and it goes on, and there's more than just the solar system, there's more than just the galaxy, there are many galaxies, and then these galaxies may make up a sort of thread that's part of some multiverse or whatever. But if you go down into a smaller, because right now we can only even tell what a planet is composed of. Like, that's pretty sophisticated if you ask me. I'm like, wow, that's mind-blowing, just based off of light, right? That's what astrophysics is, right? You look at the spectrum of light that's coming from these planets or stars, and the literally the spectrum of light is like a rainbow, and there's little black sort of like I guess just, it's not just one spectrum of color. This whole spectrum is divided with these little black bars, and those black bars determine what kind of substances exist on that planet. So that's literally how astrophysics works, and that's how we know what planets are composed of. And that's, like, to me, mind-blowing that we can do that. But it doesn't go that much further, right? I mean, but if you go down into the quantum level or you go down to the molecular level and all these things, I mean, we discover a lot more information about our universe. And
Well, it's more accessible because it's right here.
Exactly. And so, if you, like I said, in the same way that I was using the example of being an entity that exists outside of the universe, with the tip of the universe on your thumb, well, I think the same really does become real if you go down into yourself, or if you go down into the quantum levels, right? Because you are an entity, a consciousness that's observing some kind of universe, some kind of encapsulated piece of matter. And if you understand how that works, because you can clearly see it all happening in front of you at the same time, and there's where the paradox begins, because at the quantum level, time doesn't seem to apply in some ways, in the linear ways that we are sort of programmed to understand time. And so, do you get what I'm getting at? It's really about how power in relativity is just so important for philosophy. Because Einstein said, look at the universe with the idea in mind that it's all relative. And then I realized, as I continue down my philosophical career, that same concept applies to philosophy. It applies to abstract concepts, not just the physical world around us.
I mean, I don't think that's a new idea. People talk about moral relativism. Morality is a branch of philosophy, and people apply relativity to it all the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's exactly, yeah, you're right. It's a recurring theme, moral relativism. I can't, I'm straining to find another example off the top of my head, but I think you're absolutely right. So can we try to solidify this idea? Because like I said, I don't believe that time exists based on that notion of relativity, in the sense that we would like to, because we would like to see or to understand, or let's say we would like to prove that, fundamentally speaking, time passes in a linear fashion. But it doesn't, right? It does for us on our level. So this is something that we've proven already physically. So that's why I don't believe time really exists. Because if I do, then I've sort of given up my higher position, if you will, my higher vantage point from which I can actually look out and discover new things, or at least see things clearly. So I think you should reverse it, flip it on its head, and then look at how practical it is to incorporate time into our philosophies. If we say, okay, because past, future, this is what people actually care about. Do you know what I mean? They don't care about certain abstract ideas that philosophers can sort of establish, and then all of a sudden you say, wow, so that's how the universe works, or there's another problem about morality that we didn't see before. People don't give a fuck, right? People, if you're going to create an ethical philosophy, something practical, people are going to want to know, how do I live in the present so as to have a better future, and how do I let go of my past, and like different ideas like that are more practical, right? So how do you do that? How is time practical to ethical morality? Or just, that doesn't make sense. It's like a double negative, but positive. Yeah. But how is it relevant to morality, the practicality of time?
Well,
I know it's a tough question.
I mean, these are ideas that we've been using for a long time. I mean, simply studying history or studying. I mean, some people study scripture, and I don't hate on that idea. I mean, it's interesting to see people's ideas of morality 2,000 years ago, or 3 or 4,000 years ago, depending on the scripture you're talking about, and seeing what's changed, what's stayed the same, because it's some people say that morality differs completely from culture to culture. I don't really agree, honestly. I'm probably going to get a lot of flack for that. I think it has variance, and there's the very simple issue that morality is difficult in real life. So how do I say it works in some ways and doesn't work in others differently in different cultures. But all to say, looking at history and looking at your past, that's the whole idea of the human experience. As you grow, as you spend time experiencing things, you develop a different idea of morality. I'm not sure, other than that, what more, like how more practical
No,
we can get.
yeah,
It's
that's
it's it's
where,
I mean, trust, but also be wary of your memory. But use your memory. You
mhm.
think back on your experiences, and I know a lot of people want to let go of the past, but often I think that when we have a hard time letting go of the past, it's because we're not learning the lessons that it has to teach us.
Mm. And that's actually as far as my thinking takes me too when I think about the practicality of time. And that's why I'm not a fan of time very much. But I see some pitfalls there, and I kind of want to point them out. So
Sure. Yeah.
it's practical to study history. I mean, because obviously, if you identify a pattern, which you can only do in the past and in the present, which is arguably the same thing. But of course, you could do the same thing with the future. But anyway, okay. So if you look at history and you have a repetition of patterns, then you can extrapolate certain information going forward into the future. But that's where the main pitfall, sort of at the same time, remains, because you're causing a problem for the solution. And in that, I mean, let's say you've identified a pattern in history. You're going to apply it to the future. So in the present, you're going to make a certain decision. But the problem remains that you have to take into account not just the past that you studied.
No,
The
no,
past,
it can't only be that.
exactly. You have to take into account your current environment, and then you have to take into account physics and mathematics, how things work, you know,
The
and
variables that came into play in the past, patterns that you're talking
how
about,
they
and
changed.
yeah,
How
yeah,
they change. So it ends up being this, and then you realize, okay, so now I need to encompass this information. I need to think about that, so much so that you could get to the point where studying history became completely, useless. It actually ended up making things more murky in some situations, right? I think historians are very good for, political and economic decisions and that kind of thing, but they're not very good for, let's say, morality and, just on the level of people living their lives day to day. That's not like history can be applicable to that. So that's a pitfall I want to point out when it comes to time. And most people, well, they don't care
okay.
about the history,
Well,
right? So
I mean, yeah, well,
like here's the thing.
unfortunately, but
People read Yuval Harari's book, and I loved his books, right? Like I've read Homo Deus. I'm reading 21 Lessons for the 21st Century right now. And like, I feel like there is real information that a person can use. It's like, okay, I know in my head now that there's going to be a possibility, at least a greater probability even, that there's a job crisis. There won't be any labor. How do I set up my life for success, with that information that he brings? Because, that this it's very real. I think fortune tellers are historians. But how do I live my life, and he even says it himself. It's like humanity needs stories. So history isn't a story that you can apply to your own life. How do I live? How do I treat my parents, my girlfriend, strangers, what do I do in these moral situations? This is something that history has no power over, right? It can't help you figure out how to live your life, ultimately speaking. So, but this is why people have to come together. And I think, to see historians speaking with evolutionary biologists and having a neuroscientist and a psychologist all on the same stage sounds like a joke, but at the end of the day, it's some serious fucking business. I mean, these guys are just doing what needs to be done to really come together and I guess make progress in terms of where humanity is headed and how it's going to succeed in surviving in some way. So I think we've really highlighted time and its relevance and its dangers. And so I want to sort of start closing. Oh, do you have an opinion to add to that?
Well, all to say, I don't think it's something that we need to think about too much. I mean, I have some thoughts about how culture arises out of time and natural cycles, but other than that, and basic, chronology, being able to tell the time and say, hey, let's meet up at 8 o'clock, kind of thing. Time is more KAIROS than KRONOS, I would say. It's more, if you really want to get a benefit from time, which you can get from other things too, is really sit with it and contemplate it, and it'll kind of bend your mind if you really try to grasp it. It's just a good mental exercise. I don't think it's something that we need to talk about too much.
I would agree, like you said, because you're in support of the KAIROS, which basically is the tool that you use for centering yourself and having well-being, feeling transcendent, you know what I mean? All these kinds of important things. But I wouldn't necessarily go as far as saying that we don't have to think about it too much. And you used the very example that made me think about this. And it's that, like you said, if you need to tell the time so that you can meet your friend, it ultimately becomes something that's more than just KAIROS. It becomes KRONOS at that time, because Neil deGrasse.
I'm saying at that time it's definitely KRONOS. I wasn't saying that's KAIROS.
No, but what I'm trying to point out here is how they're interlinked ultimately, and so I want to see both as one entity rather than just use one more than the other and all this kind of stuff. And so Neil deGrasse Tyson puts it this way. It's very ingenious, and he says, well, you can't meet a friend at a specific time unless it's also at a specific place. And the reverse is true as well. I can't say, oh, I'll meet you at the pizza shop. Yeah, but at what time? Because I could go there right now.
Unless you're on Skype.
Yeah, exactly. So, ultimately speaking, if you can't use time as a pure measurement, if you can't place yourself in a specific point of time without also placing yourself in a specific place, then you're looking at a measurement, right? Because I think the KAIROS side of it, where time is really not a measurement, but it's a sensation. I think in some abstract way, it is a measurement. It may not be a measurement that can help you meet someone at a specific time or establish a routine for yourself, but it is a measurement of yourself in this space-time construct. It's almost like realizing who you are or what you are as part of the entirety of the universe, and that's really why meditation always kind of spews forth these same kind of mantras, right? Like, be in the moment, center yourself. It's all about time when you talk about that. Yeah. Sorry, I think the internet connection was a little slow there. Get it? The internet connection is slow.
Yeah. No, we froze a bit. Maybe I should expand more on what I'm talking about, meditating on KAIROS. Yeah. Basically, it's your relationship to time is a very feel-based thing, and it has a direct effect on your attitude towards life. Because if you're thinking constantly about the future or the past, then you're not going to be able to experience the present very easily. I mean, that's pretty basic shit. I think
Ooh,
everyone's heard that before,
can I
right?
stop? Can I stop you there, right there? That's a great idea. So,
Okay.
because I think by implication, someone can think that what you just said means that the future and the past are things that are exclusively chronos. They exclusively something that has to do with a metric, with measurements, which is physical, right? So you say, okay, in 3 days' time,
Right.
you
Yep.
know, that's a measurement, right? This will happen. So in 3 days' time is the time
Yep.
aspects, but if you the moment that you say this event will happen, you're talking about matter, you're talking about something physical, so it ultimately becomes very mathematical and existential, right? So that's very chronos. So and in the past it's the same thing. You know, 4 years ago, I fell off a ladder. Well, those incorporate metrics, and these metrics are based on, you know, physics and mathematics. So it kind of makes you think, maybe I can just equate chronos as being something that has to do with the past and the future and not something of the present. And then the reverse by
There's
symmetry.
still kairos.
I know,
Like
I
if
know, I
you
know,
think
I know.
about
Wait,
a
let me
future
finish.
that
Let me
you
finish. I'm almost
want or
done.
don't want. Yeah.
I'm almost done.
Okay.
So, oh God, I got the dog. Stop, stop. Okay. So by symmetry of identity, someone could also think, therefore, kairos, okay, is something that has to do with the present moment, right? Because like you said, if it's just the sensation of time, then that's something you can't really, you would think that's something you can't feel going into the future or going into the past. But then it makes you think, and I just want to point this out so that anybody who falls into that trap don't, because then it would imply that intuition, for example, which is a sensation of the future, doesn't really exist, or at least there's something there that has to be examined. I don't think it's so quick.
Mhm.
We shouldn't be so quick to categorize the two as if to say chronos is just a thing of chronos is the past and the future. And
No.
yeah,
It's not just one or the other,
yeah.
for sure. Um, Basically, I just want to say is like probably one of the best one of the meditations I like to do is realize that I'm always going to have problems. I've always had problems, and there's always going to be something to worry about, always something that I can bother myself with. So when I start taking this very wide perspective of reality, I kind of get more centered, and it at a certain point is like, wait, I'm okay with all of this. I can be okay with all of this. I can look at how shitty and great life is all at the same time. And it's like we were talking about, all time is one, right?
Mhm.
It's like you step out of the cycle of the hero's journey of problem, like
Struggle,
déroulement,
solution,
struggle, solution,
and
blah,
then
blah, blah.
yeah.
And then you're just okay with it for a bit. And man, that does something to your body. And I feel like it's been very beneficial for me to come at life from that point of view, from
Yeah,
that place.
I like that visualization. So I'm
Yeah.
going to resume it again real quick.
Yeah,
So
sure.
like you said, if you have that sort of problem, struggle, solution, another problem, struggle. So that's the hero's journey. And if you look at it from the outside, like as a circle, and you say, you know, this is in itself something inherently beautiful and inherently ugly at the same time, and I can accept that. And this is again leading back to the philosophy that I'm trying to create, the paradoxism thing,
Yeah.
and that we've sort of been working together on, right? It's to assume the paradoxical nature of time, and it's that it's ugly because the past can't be changed and the future can't be known, and yet you can accept it, and that acceptance is what brings you back in the moment, right? So I think
Mm-hmm.
we're clearly demonstrating how pure philosophy and mathematics and you know these kinds of concepts are very transcendental in nature. They are similar to meditation
Right.
as the standard traditional practice of just, you know, being and not thinking, right? Or at least allowing your thoughts to pass through, right? It has relativity with time there, right? Because that's what it is. Meditation is you being, right? Which is to negate time, which is to say time is of
Exactly.
a unity. It's not, you know, of a separateness, which would be kairos and chronos. It's of a unity, and so it brings you back into that present moment. So to wrap it up a little bit, I want to continue sort of unpacking the the categorizations of KRONOS and KAIROS when it comes to the past and the future. So like if KAIROS is more of your sensation, your sort of relation to time, personally, if it represents the relativity of yourself with time, then that relativity, how can we describe it when we talk about the present? And then when we talk with about KRONOS, when we think of it as being something that's more relevant to the past and the future, right? Like we said, it's a metric, something that we measure. Then how can we look at KRONOS? So I guess I made a mistake. KAIROS, how can we look at it from the perspective of the past and the future? And then how can we look at KRONOS as something from the perspective of the present, right? How does it apply to the present, KRONOS? That's where things get really interesting, right?
Right.
Because like I said, if
I mean,
I'm going to throw one.
Then we get to the high school philosopher talk of like, well, every moment passes and I'm going into the future, but then what was that? That was the past. And it's
yeah, you're talking about infinite regress, or
exactly.
or sorry, it's not necessarily regress, but divisibility. You know, because and it's to make people understand that. But I think we're trying to make that clear for people listening and watching. So I think that's worth stating. But I also want to throw another one at you, and it's intuition, right? That's a good one to think about, because I think intuition has to do with predicting the future. But that prediction is something that you do in the present moment. So inherently speaking, KRONOS, or that metric of time, is related to your sensation of time, your relativity with time, which is KAIROS, and that's where the two come together. So that's why I'm saying, how are the two merged when it comes to our day-to-day lives? So intuition is one, but there must be others, right? Like I said, if you think that your relativity with time is the KAIROS side of it, then how does the KAIROS perspective apply to the future and apply to the past, right?
Well, it's also how you like. I mean, for one, like when you're talking about your memories, how do you feel about those memories? What's the physical experience that you get when you're thinking about falling off that ladder 4 years ago? It doesn't feel so good.
And
right?
it actually is something that you do feel. It's something that you feel in the present, right? So the past and the future are ultimately connected.
And,
that's what KRONOS and KAIROS teaches us, is that the two are somehow fused together. And that's why I don't believe in time in the way that we as humans experience it. I don't believe it in a linear fashion. It doesn't unravel. It just it's a crystallized piece of matter that's just there. It's deterministic, is what I'm trying to say.
And what I would say is, I don't know about deterministic, but it's something. Kairos and KRONOS is something you can apply to scale too, right? So you can measure the size of something, but you can also think about how scale affects the way you feel. Like if you're not just physical scale, you can talk about scale in terms of transcendental concepts, which is interesting because then it's neither big nor small. It's all encompassing, and it kind of brings things together. But then, like, if you think about how some people talk sometimes, I like to question people about why they feel about the way about life, I guess. And a lot of people have very like fatalistic, nihilistic perspectives on some level. Sometimes it's just a phase, but a lot of people do. But what they say often is like, I mean, in time, we're all going to die. We're all just dust in the wind. But also people say, on the other hand, they use the example of time, or they use the example of scale. Is the universe is so big, I feel so small and
I have to tell you,
irrelevant.
I know
that's the KAIROS. That's how what the feeling you associate with those things. When, for me, that comes down to this lack of sacredness I like to talk about. Is if that's how you relate to the universe on a large scale, that is just this cold, dead alien thing, then how are you even going to live your life? You're just going to be nihilistic on a deep, fundamental, unconscious
But
level, and that's going to affect everything you do.
I don't agree with the inference there that that determinism is necessarily something that leads to a nihilistic point of view of the.
It's the way
It
that you
does.
relate to it.
It does, though. It does. I very clearly see how that's how nihilism does propagate. You know, people ultimately are deterministic, and they say, "Well, it's all determined anyway. We're all going to die. It's just the way it is. So fuck it." But I think by that same virtue of determinism, you can also, like I said, if you look at it in terms of KRONOS, you can I think salvage that nihilism and turn it into, I guess, positivism or whatever you want to call it, something that has to do with something that's a bit more
I don't know.
structured for your
I
life.
have an issue with determinism. I don't have an issue with determinism. I have an issue with the idea that reality is definitely deterministic. I think it isn't, and it is.
It's a paradox. Exactly, it's a paradox. What I'm saying is, determinism is at least a concept that we can grapple onto. Not indeterminacy, I think we can't grasp as much. You know what I mean? I think that people naturally revolve around structure and routine, chaos. We try to fight entropy, and so by virtue of that, we need to use determinism as a platform. You can't just say fuck it. It's all indeterminate either. So it both leads to very negative things, right? Because indeterminacy leads to moral relativism. I think in some capacity, it leads to
right. Exactly.
chaos. So you want to find a better balance between the two, and in order to do that, I think you can better reach that balance with a deterministic point of view of the world. But that deterministic point of view of the world,
you need to make you need to make that
you need to make
line.
the distinction. You need to understand that that's what you're doing, so that when you do use your deterministic points of view, then you can use that determinism to observe indeterminacy. And I know that sounds paradoxical, but that's the whole point. Time is a paradox. Time is all. Time is God. Okay? Time is the ultimate
the face of God.
Yes, it's just fucking it. We're talking about time. Whenever we talk about anything, time is of the essence when they say that, right? And people use that term in the very standard metric way. Like, oh, time is of the essence, so you got to hurry up. No, time is of the essence means it is. It's all that there is. It's fucking God. It rules everything. It rules our world. So that being said,
now we're gonna have to make the next episode about determinism so that people actually know what the fuck we're talking about now.
Exactly. But can you use a small example just to throw it out there?
Well, the idea that it's all just I say like a domino effect of reality, that since we're all just chemical reactions, then there's nothing we can really do to change our lives. It's like how some parents might on some level say, well, my father beat me, so this trauma is going to cause me to beat my child. Nothing I can do about it, really. I'm giving a bad side of it, but
that would be the a small practical example, so that's good enough. But if you use that determinacy, if you grapple onto it, so using your example, I was beaten because my grandfather was beaten. It's probably genetic, it's probably environmental and circumstantial to some degree. Therefore, I have a high probability of doing this in the future, right? But your awareness, that deterministic awareness, is what leads you to focus on the indeterminacy of the future. So you can say, I understand the determinacy of the past. Therefore, I can try to impact the future in the present by changing this pattern, if that's what you wish to do, because then morality comes into it. Is it something that you should do? That's a simple, clear-cut one. Most people believe, yes, you should not beat your children, so change it. But the point is, you need to grapple onto determinacy in order to look at indeterminacy in the face, because you can't just start with indeterminacy. It's chaos. There's no way that you can make any sense of the world. So all I'm saying is that I see I have a deterministic point of view of the world, because I think nobody can have any other. It's not possible.
Well, the way that's That's how I see it too. It's because since we have a brain, we understand things through logical means, through analytical means. There are some things that go beyond that,
Mm-hmm.
but you have to start from that point because you are here. Your starting point is who you are, and you have a fucking brain, and that's how you comprehend things. So yeah, absolutely. That is the starting point for sure.
Exactly. You know what I would love to do is tag on this little clip of Jimmy Kimmel just saying, okay, apologies to Matt Damon. We ran out of time. I don't know if you saw that running gag. He's been doing it for years with Matt Damon. It's kind of funny.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
That we should end this episode that way. Anyway, we really are running out of time. It's 7. I got to take a nap and then go and get super fucking drunk.
Oh, okay. It's 6 here, but
2 parties to go to. And I'm gonna get drunk and then I'm gonna fucking hate myself, at least my past self, because my future self is gonna get super sick and I know it.
Start the new year fresh, man.
Yeah, fresh, I guess, can only happen if I become unfresh first. So I'm gonna puke and then I'm gonna use.
I think that's taken care of, man.
What are you saying? That it's deterministic?
Yep. It's already been done.
Yeah.
So nothing you can do about it.
Well, happy new millennium.
Yeah, man.
Does that
Millennium?
make sense? Yeah, I knew.
Oh, okay.
Get it? No.
Yeah.
Because it's not Happy New Year or Happy New Second. It's all there anyway. I know the year 2000 passed already. I'm not crazy, but maybe.
And I mean, there's another millennium starting now. There always is. There's one right now too.
It's infinitely divisible, and the scale goes up as well. It's infinitely indivisible. Ooh.
Merry Millennium.
Merry Millennium, people. Merry Googleplex.
Okay, that's how we should sign out.
Merry Googleplex.
Yeah, Merry Googleplex.
And
we're such fucking nerds.
We are nerds, yeah. But Lloyd, he's like Festivus for the rest of us. The Seinfeld.
Yes.
You know.
Fuck yeah.
Festivus for the rest of us. For those who don't think about time, we don't give a fuck about what we're talking about right now. They're just like, okay, Festivus for the rest of us.
Festival for the rest of y'all.
Festival for what?
Festival for the rest of y'all.
Festival for the rest of y'all. That's right. I feel like there's several things we could do with that. Next to us is the best of us. I don't know why that came out. I know. I'm just trying to be weird.
I think we should drop it here, man.
James, did you already start drinking? Maybe I'm already drunk because, yeah, I'm starting to feel it in the
time's
future.
going backwards now.
My KAIROS, my KAIROS is sort of acting up here. I'm getting a sensation of being drunk soon. So
right.
I'm already getting kind of loopy just talking about random shit. Backwards. All right. Okay. I'm ending this. I'm stopping the recording.
Tired.
Peace.
Cool.
Peace.